Greg, welcome to All Things Crime.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Jared.
Yeah, it's been a little while, hasn't it?
It has. I can't remember when last you came to lab or to the state labs. I can't remember which one it was.
Yeah. So for all of you that may not know, Greg Hampikian is our guest today, and I'll tell you, he is a guru in many different facets, and I'm excited to have him on today. Greg and I go a little ways back to, I think, where we first met was when we were working on the Chris Tapp case.
Was it that, or was it the Hatfields and McCoys when we were in
you know
Virginia?
what? I think, yeah, I think you're right. I think
we
you're
were
right.
poking
Yeah.
into graves, and you were bringing the M-Vac. I got to use the M-Vac on a bed that supposedly one of the Hatfields had slept on, and
Right.
yeah, it was very exciting.
That's right. You know what? We were back there in West Virginia.
Yep.
And Kentucky, and right there on the border there where the Hatfield and McCoys were. That's right. I'd forgotten that might be the first place we met. That's right. So
yeah, great country, and it was really fun to visit out there. And they have a Hatfield McCoy museum, and
yeah,
they really treat you well down there. That was fun.
You know, that was a fun trip. We worked hard that trip, didn't we?
Yeah. We got shot at. I don't think you were there. We were poking a hole in a grave, and someone apparently didn't like that idea and fired a shotgun toward us.
Oh, that's crazy. No, I wasn't there then.
We were out in the woods and nobody saw who it was. I was assured by the producer everything would be fine.
Yeah.
And, well, they were not an extra. They were not being paid. So yeah, that was an unusual event.
Right. Well, hey, let's get into how even that filming of the Hatfield and McCoys thing, that unfortunately that never aired, but
no, they may be playing it at the museum is what I've heard, and I don't know if that's true. I think the company gave the video to somebody down there after they did their production. So yeah, we may be on a video screen at some museum.
Interesting. We'll have to revisit that place. So So tell us a little bit about your background, first of all, and how things have kind of evolved into where you are now with you're doing with the Innocence Project and all that stuff. But start us at the beginning.
Well, let's see. My father's a physicist. My mother was a kind of an activist in a sense, I guess, very concerned about her fellow human being. My father was a very conservative physicist, so I tried to balance that idea of justice and rights and science. And I ended up getting a PhD in biology at the urging of my father that you should have a PhD in science to just to understand the world a bit. And did it in fruit flies. And what happened is I was in Linda Strauss-Bau's lab, University of Connecticut, in Storrs, and she started working with Henry Lee, who's one of the greats in the forensic biology. He headed up the Connecticut Crime Lab. And they were, in cahoots in 1987, 86 about how to use DNA in crime scenes.
Okay.
And because of that, this fruit fly lab, where there were 6 of us, I guess, getting our PhDs over the 5 years I was there, 4 of us went into forensic science. And that's quite a jump from fruit flies to forensic science. But for me, it took 15 years. I went to Australia and worked on sex determination in marsupials. So what is it, that little piece of the Y chromosome in mammals, called, now we know is called SRY. But I got to collaborate with the folks who discovered that. And it was just a really exciting time. And then I was a house husband for a year. Because I was married to a woman who was trying to get tenure in a very challenging department while we had kids. And then I taught for, I think 12 years at Clayton College and State University. And I did my research at night at the CDC and Emory because I craved science. And then I got a wonderful position at Boise State University. And when I was able to get funding, they gave me a laboratory. And I've had that now for 16, 18 years, I guess.
Yeah,
16.
That's quite the journey.
Yeah, and we've specialized. So in about 1990, I started working on cases forensic cases. I wrote a book with a guy who was freed by Peter Neufeld's work at the Innocence Project in New York, and Calvin Johnson's autobiography called Exit to Freedom. I was the with. I wrote with him. And then I started doing casework with the Georgia Innocence Project, and then taking private casework. And I've been able to work. I've had a great career working. I've worked with the French police to solve a crime because my mother lived in France. We solved a 10-year-old murder there, first use of familial type searching in continental Europe. And I worked with Taiwan, the crime lab there, when we exonerated a man who had been convicted of a coincidental Y chromosome match. Worked a bit on Amanda Knox's case in Italy. And though I did most of that from my Boise State lab. I've been in courtrooms in Greece and in London. And yeah, it's been wonderful for somebody who craves international, justice, and how do people do it in other places,
Right.
because it's very different. I just testified in Canada for the first time by Zoom, and we call the judges my lord and my lady, and you bow to them when they come into the courtroom. Well, that's
Right.
very different than a United States courtroom. In England, they have wigs, the barristers and the judge, and they're in robes, and so the courtroom is kept very, very cold for the rest of us because they are stinking hot and all of that finery. Yeah, it's just crazy. And then in Greece, they have a cross behind the judge, and they asked me if I swore on my honor or the Bible to tell the truth, and I said yes, and they said, which one? And I was like, which what? Oh, the Bible or your honor. And I looked up and saw the big cross behind the judge, and I said, the Bible. That would seem to have more credibility with this particular group of people.
Right.
So yeah, you just, I have been amazed at how all cultures attempt to get to the truth through a justice system, and how science so far, I think, is the best tool that we have to do that.
Yeah, hard evidence, actual physical evidence is it's playing so much of a larger role now compared
Thank goodness.
to
Yeah.
back in the 80s and 90s and even before then, where you were reliant on eyewitnesses and those circumstantial evidence.
Well, and even confessions, which I remember, if somebody confessed, that was it. That was the gold standard for all of us. I'm not saying for bad people, good people. We all believed that no one in the United States who wasn't being tortured by the police, in a physical way, would confess to a rape or a murder they didn't commit, or killing, a child or their parent. And yet over and over again, we see, no, that happens. That's part of human nature. The interrogators are very good at what they do. I like to say I wouldn't give any of my children, when they were younger, my credit card to go to like a timeshare opportunity, to get free tickets to Disney or something, because they would buy something. People who sell ideas, whether that is trying to get a confession, which is what an interrogation is about, or a timeshare, they're good at what they do. And the worst client for someone who's representing clients is an innocent client who's swallowed by the system, thinks that the police won't ever lie to you. Whereas, the criminals know the police will lie. It's okay. And they'll use that evidence against you in court. The innocent person who grew up to trust the police doesn't know this. And so, yeah, even confessions, I had to learn all this, though. And I'm still learning every year from the experts in behavior. Yeah.
Well, hey,
anyway, I've learned a lot.
Before we get too deep into the Innocence Project portion of your career, tell me a little bit about how your science specifically, and what areas of your science background you now use in helping solve cases.
So the real tool that I learned, and it's pretty old school, is that we had one experimental variable that we change. You try to keep everything else the same in the experiment, and you measure your dependent variable, we call it. So this idea that you had to scrutinize everything about your experiment. Is the temperature the same when I ran my control versus my drugs I think will cure cancer? Are the animals basically clonal? Are they the same? And that critical, and I really mean critical as in being critical of my students' findings, of the postdocs' findings, of my colleagues' findings, of my own findings, and not trusting until you vetted out all the possible variables that could have resulted in this situation. And I had a disagreement with somebody very close to me last night who we talked about, how long do you suspend disbelief? How long do you just trust people or, give them the presumption of innocence? And it's a really difficult question. I think the system has erred throughout history on assuming guilt when there is some evidence. And we've learned through science to look at the evidence very carefully, question it very carefully, have a high standard. It depends what the standard is. And in different courts, it's different things. Civil court, preponderance of evidence, 51%. But in a criminal case, which is mostly the things I've been involved with, it's beyond a reasonable doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really strict standard. And the founders who understood this game of what happens in court,
Mm-hmm.
that the evidence is controlled, that the taxpayers support the prosecution, that the defense lawyer has a particular job to put on a good defense, not to ever perjure, not to suborn perjury. They understood that that had to be the standard, that anything other than that standard would result in wrongful convictions because of the way the system goes. I think they really tried, and I think subsequent courts, I think the courts are always struggling. What will get us the truth? So I have a great respect for the court, even though I'm one of the big critics of how things have been done in the past. But that's just as I learn, I criticize, and then hopefully things get fixed. And I feel the same way about my own work. If somebody's going to look at my work 100 years from now and just laugh.
Well, for somebody to assume that anything is perfect just by going off that initial basis is incorrect. So nothing's going to be perfect, but of all the systems around the world, like you said, that are in the pursuit of truth, certainly I would think our system is one of the better ones. So
yeah. Well, it has some of the better elements. I have to say, when Amanda Knox was being retried basically in Italy, their appeal process, just a couple of years after her conviction, allowed her defense to present new evidence. Now, that doesn't happen in America.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's convicted, in my state, in order for them to have a retrial, they first go through a lot of exhausting of state remedies. It takes 10 or 15 years to exhaust your state remedies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very hard. You can't introduce new evidence except if you get DNA. If you're fortunate, we now have a law that we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But in the Italian court, they were able to basically introduce new evidence at a appeal not long after. So the different systems have, in England, they had something where they made me sit down with the expert on the other side, a DNA expert, and produce for the court an agreement. What do we agree on? What do we differ on before the start of the court proceedings? I've never had that happen in the United States.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
Yeah, so there are things I think we can learn, but I love that Americans take justice very seriously. I think juries take their responsibilities very seriously.
They do, and I think that's absolutely fortunate that we live in a society where the vast majority of society, when called upon in
Mhm.
such a grave issue such as determining somebody's guilt or innocence, they take that very serious, and that's one of the wonderful things about being a citizen here, that
Mhm.
and that you start on the assumption of innocence. And
Yeah, which is hard and very hard to explain to people. And I think different people are able to do that differently. That's why we have voir dire, right? Before you sit on a jury, they ask you questions. Could you look at the evidence in a case where you know that someone was drunk and other people say they were belligerent, and yet look at the evidence to see whether their car crash killed this person.
Mhm.
And some people say they're just frank about it. They're like, no, if other people said he did it and he was drunk in a bar and got behind a wheel, he's guilty.
Yeah.
And you got to strike those jurors if you can, and same thing for the prosecution. If they believe that the prosecutors are all mean and, are always against Armenians, I'm Armenian, and the suspect is Armenian. And if I'm Armenian, they might say, would you treat another Armenian fairly, or would you be biased? And I say, well, I trust Armenians. They'd strike me from the jury. So I like many elements of our system. I think people do take it seriously. I don't think I'm one of those naive people maybe who doesn't think there's a lot of bad actors. I think there's a lot of bad parts of a system.
Mhm.
I think there's definitely entrenched racism in our culture. That's not unique to America. That's everywhere. My father and mother from other places that were worse. And we strive to be better, but you got to calculate all of that, and the courts do that. They wisely say a mixed race jury is important, and that's been proven over and over again. It didn't have to be that way, but the science proves that human nature is accidentally or intrinsically biased against the other, against people who look different, seem different.
Well, but the bottom line is, any system, no matter how well it's set up, no matter how perfectly it's actually set up, as soon as you start introducing the human element, it's no longer perfect. And there's
Yes.
variables and there's going to be variations that no matter how hard you try to eliminate them and get back to that perfect system, it's impossible to do. So the key is, though, in my view,
Yeah.
is you trust it as far as you can. You try to compensate for those variables, but as a whole, you look at the system as it's set up and you say, is this going to be fair?
Yeah. And you change it. I mean, I think, uh, I am a conservative and an American, a very proud American, in the sense that I believe we need to maintain the system of changing. If you look at the history of our country over 200 years, look at how we've expanded rights to women from basically property to actually owning property, to being able to inherit, to being able to vote, to having, being able to talk to their doctor about birth control. That was a Supreme Court decision in my state, Connecticut. Doctors couldn't talk to women about birth control. And I am conservative in that I want that to continue. I want us to challenge parts of the system, to have that active engagement, and I like the adversarial system. I think it protects us, and to continue to carefully always re-examine our system and change it. It's got to continuously change. That's the real conservatism. That's what America is about. America is not about the king says it and we're going to keep it that way, or it's written on some stone tablet. It is actually about the idea that we evolve our system to make it closer to that original intent, which is that all men, all people are created equal, that they have inalienable rights. And you know what? They were writing that when we had slaves. They knew it was hypocrisy. And yet it's there as a guide. There's nothing wrong with hypocrisy. That's why we have religions. They teach us a better way and teach us that we are not there yet. So I think that's what I like about our system. I like that when I get on a stand and testify, I am rigorously crossed. I really appreciate it when there's someone on the other side who knows the science and can cross me well. And when they mess up, if they don't know it well, I try to clarify what they're trying to get to. I think that testing is important. I don't think we have to bow to a system. But I wanted to ask you. You brought up a good point, saying in the system that is, some of it's human and now much of it's becoming machine, right? I mean, we have machine interpretation of DNA. What do you think humans are uniquely able to do in the system? Or where should we not allow machines to decide things?
Wow. Well, to be honest, I think you're way above my pay grade. So
I know that's not true, Jared. I've worked. I,
Yeah.
I have benefited from your systems and
Well,
your technology.
the interesting thing that I think in this discussion, which has been fascinating, I always love to get different perspectives. Which, to be honest, that's the reason that I've started this that All Things Crime and this video cast, is because my goal in producing this is to get perspectives of all different portions of the process, all the way from the crime scene and the crime scene investigator who is picking through evidence and trying to in conjunction with the detective, trying to put together what actually happened. How was this victim wronged? And then putting together the story and then combining that story with what they think happened with physical evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And the more scientific we become as a society, then the more scientific evidence can be included into that story.
Yeah, but what part, what are people good at? You know what I mean? Because I really believe the machines are better at following rules,
Well, of course, but
whether they're logical rules or whatever
right,
rules.
right. Well, but the problem is machines machines are 100% garbage in, garbage out,
Mm-hmm.
or good data, good results. And so they will produce whatever it is the human puts into it. And so there's many areas that I think scientifically we can compensate for areas where humans are lacking. But at the same time, there's always a beginning and there's always an impetus of any kind of physical evidence. But that starts with a human. So it doesn't matter how good machines become, meaning that especially like the lab processes, specifically with DNA, if you look at it, the DNA process is only as good as the start that the human input into that process. And that's so to answer your question, it's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Do I ever want a robot sitting on a jury judging me? No.
Right. I mean, I come to that same conclusion. There's something about that ultimate judgment and the fact that machines cannot be merciful or cannot entertain feeling. And there is a place for that, but to me, it's a very narrow place. I really think it's with the jury. I think the rest of us have to be as machine-like as possible, to be quite honest. The other place I see is creativity and trying to imagine different scenarios, different hypotheses to test. I think humans can be a little off the wall, and that sometimes helps when it's an unusual case. But for the most part, I think the rules are better followed by machines. And so now we have probabilistic genotyping, which many times I know your M-Vac is used to collect data, and it's sometimes very complex data. It seems that the probabilistic genotyping is better than, or certainly helps people, helps me when I'm doing manual interpretation. Now, I'm also finding some problems with probabilistic genotyping. No matter what we invent, whatever drug you invent, there's a side effect.
Yeah. Well, before we move on,
yeah.
For somebody that doesn't understand, like if our audience was a jury, for example,
yeah,
explain probabilistic genotyping.
Sure. So when we get a mixture of DNA that's more than one person, and I think with what your product, the M-Vac, you often get that because you'll get deep residual DNA from fabric or something, from a couch. And when we have that, it looks like a lot of peaks on a graph. And what we're trying to do is to group the peaks into single people, into representative people. So all the peaks that are about the same height are possibly from the same person. If there's a lot of tall peaks on the graph and a lot of short peaks, maybe it's two people. And so it's the amounts of DNA that we see at testing many sites. What probabilistic genotyping does is it actually generates kind of random interpretations of what that can mean and tests them. Is this random interpretation better than the one I just did? And for me to do that by paper, it's an hour and a half, 2 hours for each of those interpretations.
Mhm.
whereas the computer can do, 100,000 of them in an afternoon, right? And that's what it is. So it's calculations, comparisons of hypotheses, basically many hypotheses, to get to the most likely, the interpretation that says the evidence is most likely with, there are two people in this mixture. Greg Hampikian, put in the most, Jared put in the lower amount. That's the interpretation that works best. We tried, Richard Nixon, we tried Obama, Trump, none of them are included.
Right.
And that's what the computers are good at, is entertaining lots and lots of hypotheses and then telling us which ones, for which ones is the evidence most likely.
Right. And that's the interesting thing about that, especially in conjunction with the M-Vac, because the M-Vac collects so much more than other collection methods. Like you said, oftentimes it can get deeper, it can go wider. And so you may get more DNA, and some of that DNA is your target DNA, but some of that DNA might be DNA you don't necessarily want. But fortunately, because of the advances in the lab processes, and again, because of this probabilistic genotyping, the software that can interpret it, it enables us to become more clear on possibly what those results were. And so, but the interesting thing is, even with that, you still have to take those results, give it back to an investigator, and say, now, here's some more actionable data. Now move forward with it and continue on with your investigation.
Right. And then eventually you have maybe a Daubert hearing, which, there's two ways that we consider evidence. One is, will the evidence be presented to the jury or excluded? And that happens without the jurors there. That's a hearing that can happen. So a judge has to be convinced that the level of the science is, generally acceptable, that an error rate has been established, that it's been peer reviewed. Whatever the prongs are of that. And then when the jury hears it, we have to communicate to a jury what we think the weight they should give. How strong a match is it? When I say match, when I'm lecturing, I have the students are supposed to say statistic, because since 2010, we've been required to give a statistic. You can't just say the DNA is consistent, which we used to go into court and say that. We used to just say, and we used to testify, they used to have us testify to a high degree of scientific certainty, and nobody knew what that meant, but we were all taught to do it. And then finally, we realized, oh no, there are statistical methods that you can use to present that data, and there's various ones. And I have a TED talk that people can watch where I go through like what some of the problems of those statistical methods are, because you can give the same data, exact same data, to two different labs, and they will produce statistics that can have 13 zeros apart. The difference between the change in my pocket and the gross domestic product of the United States. And so
More than 13, I'll tell you that.
What's that?
It's a lot more than 13 places.
Yes, yeah. Well, they've gotten as high as, I don't know how many places now. Last time I looked, it was like 18 places. The studies that have done this, the National Institute of Standard Technology, I wrote a piece for the New York Times about, the problems that the National Institute of Standard Technology was able to show when they gave the same data to, 109 labs in North America. 70% of them, they gave them 5 different scenarios. On the 5th scenario, a bank robbery, they gave them evidence. And it was about 70% of the labs falsely included a difficult to interpret suspect. But they didn't, the point of the experiment by the National Institute of Standard Technology was to say, how many labs would look at this and just say, no, we can't answer that question, which is a fine thing to say. That's what you're supposed to do. But instead, 70% guessed and included this person that was not included. And it was a difficult to interpret profile. But what that shows us is just because it's science, just because you're using a valid mathematical approach,
right,
it doesn't mean that another lab using science and a valid mathematical approach will come to a very different number for the weight. And that doesn't mean throw out everything. It just means be aware that in these difficult interpretations, it's still problematic.
Well, and that's, to me, that's why if you look at our entire courts and justice system, it doesn't matter what piece you're looking at, whether it's a even a confession or a solid 1 in a trillion DNA profile. All of those things are just a piece in the puzzle, and the entire puzzle has to be met and put together before you can actually say, yes, this person is guilty, and yes, this person belongs in prison, or this person is completely innocent and should be moved off. And so, but again, to me, that requirement for putting together the entire puzzle piece in order to actually find the truth and find justice is what makes the entire court system. It's not perfect, but it is what was put together, 225 years ago, and so it's worked pretty well for us thus far. And
well, with the amendments to it, yes.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
As originally practiced, there were some problems.
Yes, but certainly.
But that's why I'm a conservative. That, you know, the founders wisely saw that, you know what, we haven't figured it all out, and that's what I say as well. I haven't figured it all out. Don't take what I say and think if you apply what I do, you're going to do it right. What I tell my students, especially the graduate students, is, you know, if you know everything I know by the time you graduate with me, if you have read every paper I've written, everything that was published this week, and you can answer every question about it, what is your contribution to the field? 0 is the answer.
Right.
You have to find where I'm wrong or ignorant, where, in fact, where everybody in the entire world is wrong or ignorant. That's what science is. You don't get a degree unless you find something where the entire world is wrong or ignorant. And that's why technology, like you've developed, is so important, because you created something that wasn't there before, and that's important to science. So you can never rest on your laurels in science.
Yeah,
you shouldn't.
Well, I need to correct you there. I didn't produce it.
Well, your dad, right?
My dad invented it, and
I give you the genetic credit. I know, but you've done a lot to bring it to the field. I mean, honestly, you and the folks who brought it out, and I mean, I've seen it demonstrated. I had an opportunity on 2 cases in this last week to recommend it for particular things that I think it's good at. And I didn't tell you, Jared, but, you know, we tried to improve on that technology. We tried a method that we thought would be better, and you know what? It wasn't any better. So I ended up, and the student ended up leaving, so we never published it. But we were not able to succeed in improving what works really well. I mean, this isn't meant to be an endorsement of your product in every way, but to recognize that, there's technology. We're all trying to, some of us, you know, I have some patents, none of them have made any money. We're all trying to push that future, you know, into the present. And you got to do something where the rest of the world is wrong or ignorant. So,
right, that's what the scientific theory and the entire scientific process is all about. And that's one of the exciting things about mixing science with business, with the justice system, and it's just such a fascinating field to be working in.
Yeah.
And I'm always running into, you know, folks like you that have, well, there's nobody like you. I'll tell you that. Right?
Oh, that might be best for them.
Well, take that for what it will. But the bottom line is, everybody's contributing in some way, and working hard. As long as all of us are pursuing the truth, then eventually everything will become better. And
I am like you. I'm an optimist, Jared.
Yes,
so yeah,
absolutely. To wrap things up here, tell us a little bit about your work with the Innocence Project. You can bring up specific cases if you want to, but as a whole, tell me about what it is you do with the Innocence Project and why you do it.
So I'm a co-director of the Idaho Innocence Project. So the way the Innocence Projects work is that New York is kind of the mothership, the Innocence Project, and all of us have a specific kind of license to work within our state or area, whatever it is. So when I work on Idaho cases, I do that through the Idaho Innocence Project, and we have to show that we're able to work on those cases for an organization called the Innocence Network. And then I have another organization called the Forensic Justice Project at Boise State University, because we work on cases from all over the world, and we can't use that name, Idaho Innocence Project, for those. So what typically happens in the innocence work we do is I either get a letter, I get 1 or 2 of those a week that claims I'm a prisoner, I'm innocent, or somebody in an organization somewhere says, hey, we need DNA help. We're lawyers at the Illinois Innocence Project, Montana, Georgia. We've worked with all over the world Innocence Projects. And so we specialize in DNA, and Janet Lane, who's in my lab now, does most of the DNA work. I mean, I supervise, I pot shot and all, but the people in the lab do the real work. Gianluca Perry used to be doing it, before him, Mike Davis worked on it. So these folks work in my lab, and I have the lab. We also work on cancer. We're now working on COVID. We work on HIV. But I think what we're best known for is the forensic work. So we have all of the equipment that a typical crime lab would have, maybe not as many of them, but we have the PCR, the real-time PCR, the genetic analyzer. And all of this allows us to work on cases. I don't bring the evidence into the lab anymore. That's sent out independently to labs that are accredited to work on that type of stuff, and my students won't get subpoenaed. But we'll do the reference from potential people who match it. So for example, we worked with the Idaho Falls police, and we worked with the police here in Canyon County, 2 genealogy cases where men were falsely incarcerated in prison. Christopher Tapp in Idaho, and then Charles Fain. We helped get Tapp out, but the police still said he was guilty of murder, just not rape anymore. So we helped the police find the DNA match through genealogy to some semen that was left on a dead woman's body. We also worked with the Canyon County Police, and just recently in a really monumental improvement in the science, worked with Ed Green's lab. He has an ancient DNA lab, and he can take, and now several other groups are doing this, but pieces of hair that have no root, which to us, we used to just be able to do a very weak statistical match through mitochondria.
Right.
But we can now take that and do full genealogy from a fragment of hair. And so in May, his results led to a new warrant in the rape and murder of a 9-year-old girl in Nampa that happened 30-something years ago, that Charles Fain had been on death row in Idaho for 17 years for.
Right.
So we specialize in either trying to develop the technologies from other fields like ancient DNA and bring them into forensic science, or to apply the very best of forensic science to cases, or to scrutinize results from other labs that may have falsely led to a false conclusion. So we helped free, as I mentioned, a man in Taiwan. We worked with the Taiwan Association for Innocence. He was convicted of rape based on a coincidental match from a Y chromosome DNA, from Y chromosome. We pushed for further testing. They tested more areas of the Y chromosome, and he was excluded, and he went free. So our specialty is either looking at work other labs have done, or finding the best route for testing what evidence is left, often in these cold cases, and frequently post-conviction claims of innocence.
Right. Wow. This kind of stuff, it's amazing. Clearly, in 45 minutes that we've been together today, we're not going to be able to explore even a fraction of what it is you do. But again, my purpose for all things crime in this video cast is to kind of give just a brief overview of what people do and kind of how it fits into the entire justice system. And I can't thank you enough for coming on. It's been
my
awesome.
pleasure.
I need to get back up to Boise, and we can go do dinner or something. And
it'd be great to talk. Maybe we'll do a live broadcast from the lab someday when we're not all wearing masks.
Oh, right. Wouldn't that be fun? Let's do it.
Yeah, we can take let our guard down a little between procedures and talk. Well, good. It's great to see you, and thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, thank you. Okay, we'll talk to you later.